All right, so this next video is a really important one, especially for the first project in the class. And this video, we're going to explain what the grid is and why it's so important to everything that's going to come after you record your parts. In the last video, we played a drum groove. We set up the metronome, we got a tempo, and then we heard the click, and I played along with the click to the best of my abilities. And then we kind of cleaned things up by quantizing the performance, which moved our drum notes onto the grid. So what the grid really is it's a time base for the whole session. And when we look at our edit window, the lines that you see are set up to a grid of either bars and beats, or minutes and seconds, or frames if you're doing film work or samples. But the way we've set up this session is that it's showing us grid lines for bars and beats. So bars is the same thing as measures, and then within each measure we have however many beats. In this case it's 4 beats per measure. So if we look at my screen here and the little drum groove that we created in the last session, 2, 2, 3, 4. That groove is lined up on the bars and beats. And if we double click the edit window, we can see the little triangles there for each note that got played. And right now, because they're on the lines, they were quantized, so they're all lining up perfectly. If I try to move, let's say, this clap, watch what happens. Can you see that it's snapping to the grid lines? So the grid that we're seeing right now is a 16th note grid. Its beats have been subdivided into 4 equal parts, which we call 16th notes. And as I try to move these notes around, they snap to the next grid line. If I turn off snap to grid right here, I can now move the notes freely anywhere that I want to on the timeline. So you can see I can move it smoothly back and forth, and it doesn't snap to the grid lines. I'm going to go ahead and turn that back on and put it where it belongs. So in terms of editing your performance, you can quantize things. You can just select the whole performance and quantize it to the grid. But there might be some times when you want to individually go in and move things around a little bit. And if snap to grid is turned on, it's going to do exactly that. But if you want to be able to do it freely without snapping to the grid, you just turn that off. I want to point out another important thing or concept related to grid. And that is that if we do any editing, like copying and pasting sections or duplicating our grooves to kind of fill out the timeline, we have to make sure that we're on the grid and that we're in grid mode when we do those edits. So let me see if I can demonstrate this for you. Right now we have 2 bars of drums, and if I were to copy this, so I've got it highlighted, I do Command C for copy. And then if I was to put my cursor here and do Command V, it will copy the groove so that now we have twice as much groove on the timeline. And it still lines up and works fine. So it's lining up with our click, lining up with the metronome, everything's cool. However, let's say that when I created this groove, I wasn't quantizing my section to the grid, and I'm going to kind of throw it off. I'm going to turn off the grid mode, and I'm going to drag this a little bit so that I'm not fully filling up 2 measures of time. Can you kind of see on the timeline, it goes here, and then we're just shy of that 5-minute mark. And if I tried to loop that now or copy and paste that, it would leave a little bit of the groove off. The chunk would be kind of missing. A better example of this is if we do a feature that's called duplicate. Command D is a really great way, shortcut to just take a chunk of groove and just duplicate it out very quickly. So if I go back to my original groove here, snap to the grid, and hit Command D, it's pretty much the same thing as copy and paste. It just does it sequentially down the timeline. And I can do this as many times as I want. It's a really quick way to kind of multiply your groove. Okay, but if my groove is not on the grid, like that, and I hit Command D, it's going to duplicate exactly what's selected. And if that's less than 2 full measures, then our groove is going to get off from the click track. So I'm going to play this back, and you'll hear when we get to the second grouping of groove, it's going to start getting off from the click. Check it out. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh my. Ah! Right? So now we're like totally off the grid, and it just doesn't work at all. So you have to make sure, if you're going to duplicate or copy and paste your grooves, that they're a full, 2 or 4 or 8 measures, so that when you do the duplicate command, your copies and your pastes will line up with the timeline. Okay, so work on that. See if you can get a loop that's exactly 2 measures long, and then try to duplicate it, Command D, and make it longer.